I'm David Clayton, and this is the Way of Beauty podcast, conversations on Catholic faith and culture. Hi there, I'm here with Charlie Deist in his boat in the Berkeley Marina, just in case you're looking at these surroundings with the sun streaming in through the windows. And we're going to talk today about, diet and then also feasting and fasting, and whether bodily needs can coincide with spiritual requirements with regard to eating. And so first of all, hi Charlie, good to see you.
Good to see you, David.
And it's great to be in your new studio here down at the marina.
The pod.
Yep.
The podcasting pod.
So, what I thought I would do is just explain in broad terms the feasting and fasting cycle in the Eastern Church. The reason that I pick on that is that there's a sort of clear pattern that most people try and observe. And then we'll explore how this might connect with different patterns of eating, just simply from the point of view of bodily health. Because it occurred to you and I as we were talking earlier that people will commit for health reasons to a particular diet, but maybe there's an argument that says we should have different ones at different times, or a combination of these different things for perfect health.
There's a season for everything.
Yeah, exactly. And working on the premise that you order your life first to the spiritual end of the person, it would be interesting to see how that might tie in. And so I'll start by just describing the pattern in the year in the Eastern Church. So the year begins on the 1st of September, and through the year, typically, there will be abstinence on Wednesdays and Fridays, so 2 days a year. In the Roman Church, we're used to Fridays, but I think traditionally it was Wednesdays and Fridays as well. And the degree to which you fast and abstain really depends on your state of life, but the hardest would be the monastic, which would be no meat, no dairy, no oil, and then also not eating until Vespers. What happens in practice is that people do different degrees of that according to their what stage of life they're at, how used they are to doing this. So I'll tell you a sort of typical pattern, one that I'm trying to aim for. And so on Wednesdays and Fridays, I would abstain from meat, and that's it. So I would just cut out meat. I do my best not to eat in the morning. I typically don't have breakfast anyway, but that's not really part of the spiritual requirement. That's just my pattern of eating. So Wednesdays and Fridays, starting in September, I abstain from meat. Then we have the run into Christmas in Advent, and for something like a month before Christmas, we would extend that Wednesday, Friday abstention to every day. And very often what happens is that there's a relaxation of some sort at the weekends. So those who are doing a harder fasting, maybe not eating during the day or something like that, might eat during the day at weekends or something like that. But what I would do is just not eat meat before in the approach to Christmas. And then, of course, on it's important to note that on the feast days, you eat all of these things and you enjoy it. And there's usually a period of feasting even after the feast, an octave, something like that.
Are Sundays feast days within that, or is it just special calendar days?
No, just the special calendar days. So unlike the West, you don't relax on Sunday. There is a moderate relaxation, sometimes Saturdays and Sundays, but it's not a full relaxation.
But you said some people are fasting until dinner time during the week, or just during this period?
Well, the monastic, which is the sort of ultimate standard, would be you don't eat. They say either before noon would be a cut-off, or if you really want to do it, before Vespers, so all day. So in other words, you just have an evening meal and you eat in the evening. And so some people do have that. So they have what you would call a sort of partial fast or something like that.
I see.
So you're abstaining, which means you're restricting the foods that you eat, and then you're doing a sort of a fast for part of the day as well. And you can vary that according to where you feel you are spiritually. Younger people would tend to be more hardline on this than someone of my age at 58. So then you have a relaxation after the feast, where it doesn't mean you have to gorge yourself, but you don't always apply the Wednesday and Friday might go as well. You can eat what you like. The next thing would be, or main part of the cycle would be Lent in the approach to Easter, which is about 7 weeks. And for that, you have Monday to Friday would be a pretty strict abstinence. So no meat, no dairy. And for some, no fish either.
Oils? Where are oils?
Well, the monastic would be no oils. I've heard Father Sebastian, our pastor, sort of propose that. I can't even begin to contemplate no oils. but that's where you would have your strict Monday to Friday during Lent would be your strictest observance of both what you abstain from and also the length, the duration of that fast in the course of the day. So don't eat before Vespers. In other words, just have an evening meal. That's what I try and do. So I would abstain from fish, meat and dairy Monday to Friday. I do have oils, I admit. And then on the weekends, I would introduce dairy. So I would have cheese and eggs as well. And would be more relaxed about not eating during the day as well. Mm-hmm. So it relaxes, but it's not a full relaxation at the weekends. So you do that for 7 weeks. That's quite difficult, and I have to say I've been trying now for the past 2 or 3 years, never managed to observe it fully. And the other thing is that if you're a guest at someone's house, you don't impose your fasting requirements on the others. So I will admit to occasionally sort of using that as an excuse to break it, where maybe I didn't need to. But once you get to Easter, then afterwards you have a clear period where there is no fasting at all or abstinence for the whole of the Easter season. So a couple of months, something like that, 50 days. And at that point, then you introduce Wednesday and Friday again. So we're now in late spring. And so you start to introduce in the weekly cycle Wednesday and Friday. And then finally, the last feast that comes to mind is the Dormition of the Mother of God, or the Assumption of Our Lady, as it's also called. And for about 2 weeks or something before that, there would be the abstention from meat. So the same approach.
When do they celebrate that?
That's August the 15th.
Same as Roman Catholic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's my birthday, incidentally.
Oh, okay. All right. So the first couple of weeks of August, something like that, you're having an extended fast with one break for the Transfiguration in the middle of that, which is a feast day. But that 10 days or that 14 days, those 2 weeks, they're not the deepest fast that you would, or abstention that you would do in Lent. That really seems to be reserved for Monday to Friday during Lent. It would be the lesser form. So what I do is I abstain from meat during those days, and try not to eat before the evening meal. So I'm just thinking about what that would mean. So there's all sorts of possibility of, excuse me, cycles where you're abstaining from protein and meat. When you have the deep fast during Lent, of course you could eat bread and grains and that sort of thing. And it's very difficult, I think, not to do that, just to fill up if all you're eating is vegetables and you don't have any protein at all. So I might tend to do that a bit. So I was just wondering, what is your reaction to that? As I'm speaking, can you see some cycles in the year which fit in with your ideas about healthy diet and eating?
Yeah, my mind first goes to the idea of religious practice as being valid beyond the sort of you can almost justify it on secular grounds as traditions that have survived because they produce some sort of benefit for the people that held to them closely. Yes. And I think at one point in my life I kind of came to the conclusion that that's what religion was all about. That's all there was to it, was yes. That it was certain practices which the most successful groups that reproduced and propagated themselves had adopted, that had these adaptive benefits. And I got that idea actually from Friedrich Hayek, of all people, who writes about certain forms of knowledge being embedded within the society against this kind of rationalist constructivist interpretation of knowledge that says that it all has to be understood in individuals' minds. You can actually have something that is operating below the surface, but because it's adaptive or beneficial, it survives and it gets propagated. As for the cycles and the seasons and times of year, from a health perspective, if you look at mammals that hibernate during the winter, you see that they follow a very strict calendar where they're fattening up during the summer so that and into the autumn so that they can hibernate through the winter. And a bear might bulk up to 1,500 pounds, and then it comes out of its cave 4 months later and is totally emaciated but ready to chow down. And so I think that I address this a little bit in my book on fitness and health, where I talk about the anti-autumnal diet, where I say that the modern food environment is so obesogenic, meaning it leads us to naturally overeat. We live in such superficial abundance that there's no check on what we eat during the winter or the summer, and so it mimics the autumnal diet of an animal that's getting ready to hibernate. But we're not going into hibernation, and so it's not very adaptive for us. So certain bodybuilder communities have adopted the idea of the anti-autumnal diet, where you basically are avoiding the combinations of food that would be most sought after by animals seeking to bulk up before winter. And that combination turns out to be fat and carbs together. So some sort of carbohydrate substance like tubers, root vegetables, honey. Come across a beehive, that's going to be a great boon for your sugar intake. And then if you kill a wild salmon in the river, you're going to get lots of good fat from that. You put them together, that's the perfect combination for fattening up. But it was extremely rare in nature to have this combination together. So anti-autumnal diet kind of tries to separate out the fats from the carbs and say, you eat your carbs at one time in the day, say evening, afternoon. Maybe we're less sensitive to insulin spikes in the evening, and then you eat your fat earlier in the day, in the morning. Or you say, I'm just eating fat today, and then later on you're eating carbohydrates. So there is, I think, a kind of logic to those cycles, and the most dangerous thing is eating everything all of the time. But as long as we aren't eating everything all of the time, there's a pretty big range in which humans can thrive on just about anything.
Right. What about an annual cycle? So you talked about in the course of a day. What I was describing was a weekly and a seasonal cycle in the course of the year. Has anyone ever explored that at all? So you go from keto, for 3 months, and then you have high carbs for 3 months or something like that.
I think in terms of the seasonal fluctuations where, some foods are only in season in the summer, and you might eat more fruit in the summer when it's fresh, or certain kinds of fruit. And now it's kind of messed up by the fact that we can import things from anywhere. And I'm not against that, and I eat fruit year round. But I could imagine being persuaded to, especially in summertime when we tend to be more active, when our circadian rhythm is tuned to the longer days, and it's kind of sending us the message: go out, be active, produce, plant ahead for the harvest. Our bodies are more willing to waste that energy that we consume. So I'd be more inclined to eat a high carb diet during the summertime. And then the wintertime, it's interesting because I know people that, basically say, hey, it's the holidays, I'm just going to accept that I'll gain a few pounds. And I think that also can kind of make sense if you have built into it some sort of discipline on the other side of that, where you know that you will be either more active or cutting down on that autumnal combination of, the Thanksgiving feast, which is another perfect example of carbs plus fat. You're eating the gravy and the pecan pie and the potatoes with butter, and making me hungry just thinking about it. Weekly, though, I can't say that I have ever thought about that, except in the context of I've found at times that daily fasting isn't that practical, or doesn't quite fit. It's a little too much stress or something like that, but I can bring myself to fast on a Friday or 1 or 2 days a week.
Right. By fast, you mean no food at all, or you're talking about abstaining from certain
Yeah,
foods?
I mean, no food, although I might have coffee with cream or a piece of dark chocolate. All these little hacks to cheat, so to speak, in terms of staving off hunger. And I think that kind of goes against the spirit of some of the fasting rituals, as they have come to us through religious traditions, with a lot of wisdom about the value of temporarily weakening yourself and experiencing the kind of wretchedness of being hungry and more dependent on God ultimately.
Yes, that is a good point. That while we're searching for patterns of eating that are in harmony with spiritual health, so we're trying to unite spiritual and physical health, a little bit of physical decline temporarily is not necessarily a bad thing overall, for spiritual reasons, and ultimately the spiritual is the more important. What occurs to me is that I've been listening to you talking about your ideas on eating, is that during Lent, that might be the time. So when I'm eating the vegetables, predominantly vegetable diet, no meat or fat, maybe some oil, but it occurs to me that if I was going to cut out the oil, that would be the time to eat the carbohydrates. So have bread and vegetables, and I could imagine quite enjoying that diet, because I must admit, when I first thought about doing this, I think I lasted about 3 days in Lent. I mean, it's just the thought of doing this for 7 weeks unrelentingly. I just couldn't imagine it, and now 3rd or 4th year in, I'm sort of getting used to it. So I'm guessing that would work quite well. What about activity? When if for 7 weeks is quite a long time. You would get a little bit of protein at the weekends, carbohydrates and vegetables Monday to Friday. So that's during the Lenten period. Should you think about reducing your activity and hard work, if you can, and exercise during that period, or does it not really matter?
I wouldn't worry about it too much. Okay. I think that the emphasis, again, from the bodybuilder community and this sort of perverse influence that it's exercised over the fitness world, we're always thinking in terms of, bulking up, adding muscle. But the body has 2 modes of operation. There's the building up, or the metabolic, and the breaking down, or catabolic. and building up is anabolic, breaking down. Both of these are metabolic processes, and you can think of them as kind of a yin and a yang, where we need the breakdown in order to build up healthy, tissues again. And in particular, there's this process that I've talked about on your podcast before, yes, of autophagy, which is the Greek word literally meaning self-eating, where our cells go in and look for, opportunistically, junk proteins that have accumulated, little organelles that have lived past their useful life, and it turns those into usable proteins. It even recycles them into new building blocks. And so you can think of it as kind of like the vacuum cleaner going up and picking up all this stuff that contributes to aging. And if we get rid of that periodically, it not only sets us up to build up healthy tissue again, but is also just going to make our bodies more efficient at doing everything that they do. And also there's this obsession with eating a lot of protein immediately after you exercise. And it turns out that there's a window of at least 48 hours or so where the body can take advantage of that protein and apply it to healing muscles in that prime sort of anabolic instance of exercise and the benefits of resistance training, which include the breakdown and then rebuilding of muscle tissue.
And so that means then that for most people, you don't really need to think about what you eat immediately afterwards. The window's large enough that you're going to be eating what's appropriate anyway. So.
We get plenty of protein in the same way that most people don't need to go looking for extra ways to incorporate salt into their diet. I would say, as a general rule, I think that for people who are trying to lose weight, adding protein into your diet is generally a good move. But for shorter windows, it's not going to set you back, and it will probably actually set you up for greater success once you reintroduce it. And then the last thing I would say is that in terms of your energy levels during a workout, protein is one of the worst fuels. So, you don't want to eat a chicken breast right before you work out. You might eat something that has a little more carbohydrates, or if you are fat adapted, if you're someone who follows a high fat diet, like the ketogenic diets or a high-fat version of paleo, where you're eating a lot of healthy animal products with fat, then your body can preferentially burn fat and power a workout just fine, which is one of the signs of healthy metabolic flexibility, being able to switch between different kinds of fuel more effortlessly and with less stress on your body.
Right. The other thing that occurs to me is that, as you were speaking, at my age, I'm 58, I don't really have quite the same degree of option that you have of stepping up my exercise level. As soon as I try and exercise hard, I get it, my knees go or my back goes or something like that. So I can walk and I can do more. I'm not totally immobile. Whoops. But it strikes me that if I want to stay trim, that actually then I need to start developing more control over the food that I eat, and which says that it's a little bit of a sort of lifetime exercise. That just my experience in the of having started this relatively recently, even in 3 or 4 years, I've noticed that I'm getting better at doing it and more controlled. And I find the seasonal variation manageable, so that I know that I can do something for a set period if I know that I'm going to relax at the end of it. But the pattern is set for me, so that's helpful. Go on,
Right, and deprive. When you deprive yourself, it does lead to a kind of energy conservation in your body. Where if you start to restrict calories, people find themselves getting cold because their body is trying to conserve that energy. If you don't deprive yourself, but rather just delay gratification, it's easier psychologically, and your body doesn't go into that energy conservation mode. And you make a good point about, from a body composition perspective, the amount of adipose tissue that you carry. It's primarily diet, and discipline, not and not diet as in going on a diet, but diet as in the makeup of what you eat, that determines your level of body fat rather than the amount that you exercise. So you tend to have, greater appetite if you exercise a lot more, especially if it's just kind of the calories in, calories out, running on a treadmill sort of exercise. But I would say that at any age, there are certain kinds of movement and exercise, namely resistance training, that remain possible for, even up into your 80s. You can do it safely and with great benefits, not just for your strength, but also these kind of hormonal cascading effects that happen when you lift heavy things slowly and with control, not the Olympic lifts of clean and jerk over the head and but that is something that I would recommend to anyone, especially older people, because you start to get problems with bone density and the risk of falling down. All these things start to go up the older you get, and if you're doing some form of resistance training, just a little bit, it can be 15 minutes a week, can have really profound benefits.
It's interesting. I was I've heard you talk about this a little bit in the past. So as a result of that, I actually reduced. I bought 2 little dumbbells. I think they're 12 pounds, and then I got a pound wrist thick, so it's 13 pounds each, which is not a lot. But I was so weak, especially in my upper body, that it was a strain for me. And what I did is I just did repetitions on a variety of different lifts, up to a maximum of 30. But when I started, imagine I'm doing some curls like that. I couldn't do 30 even at that weight. So I would just do what I could. But instead of doing them every other day or something like that, I listened to you, and I just decided I'd do it once a week, just each exercise once a week. And it takes me perhaps 15 minutes to do 30 reps of the range of things that I have at that weight. And I just see what happened. Firstly, it did get easier. I noticed that it was getting easier. And a friend of mine, my friend Jim, who I think he imports clothes. He had some jackets to give me, and he put them aside for the size that I used to be. And I wasn't aware of this, but I just couldn't fit into them. And he said, "What have you been doing?"
Hypertrophy.
So I said to him, "Well, I've just been doing these exercises that Charlie recommended," and I described it. And so I said it might take, I don't know, probably about 10 minutes, actually, not even 15. And he said, "What's that, a day?" And I said, "No, a week. That's all I've done." And it seems to have made a difference. And I am conscious at 58, I can still I've got time to do some things that will help me. If I develop these habits now, they'll help me in 15 years, 20 years, or something like that. So it really did seem to have an effect, actually. So, yeah, very good.
You wanted to talk about the seasonality of exercise as well, and whether there might be cycles for that.
So the logic behind this, and I'm just speculating, I've got no idea, but we know that from the spiritual point of view, it is good to have weekly cycles, seasonal cycles of abstaining from food and then allowing yourself to feast. And so we were just thinking about the possibility of how you eat might also be in harmony with the bodily needs. And then I wondered, is there a cycle through the year of physical activity? I know you're very interested in MoveNat, this natural movement process, but is the experience that you just do that the same through the year, or are there periods where it's good to rest and not do it, and other periods where it's good to do it more intensely on a yearly cycle or a weekly cycle? How does that work, do you think? Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, my approach to outdoor natural movement, or MoveNat, is very much an elemental approach, meaning that it follows the literally the natural elements from, fresh open air to cold open water, the earth beneath bare feet, and being in the sunlight. And I've taken to swimming in the last few years, and that has sort of a seasonal cycle to it, where the wintertime I get this added benefit of cold exposure because the water's right around 50 degrees in the bay. Summertime it gets up to 57, 58, and I no longer get that kind of shock to the system that is also beneficial in small doses. So I can swim longer during the summer, but I don't get that same, there are immune benefits that come from colder water. And I think that there's also a similar sort of cycle with sunshine in the summer, where we want to think about developing a solar callus to be able to stay out in the sunlight longer during the summer without getting sunburnt. And that's something that I've become more aware of, because it's not a good thing to stress your body to the point of red skin. But if you get a little bit of sunlight every day, starting in the morning, 15 minutes here and there, then in the evening, you're building up a tolerance for it so that you can get, a healthy amount of sunlight without ever getting burnt, just because your skin adapts. And we all know this as just getting tan. But in the book, my book, which is all about this idea of beneficial stressors, I call it hormetics, which is just a way of saying, the beneficial stress, an approach to fitness that looks more at beneficial stress as the underlying concept, rather than this kind of punitive concept of calories in, calories out.
Right.
And I would also say that in the summertime, when our bodies are more willing to sort of shed weight, because of it's largely to do with the circadian rhythm and the fact that there's more waking hours to be active and to do stuff. The light enters through our eye and sends signals that tell the body to go into energy wasting mode, whereas the wintertime, the light, the temperature, they're all sending signals: conserve energy, keep fat, we're entering a time of scarcity, so don't give this up so easily. So I do think that there's a natural tendency to gain a little bit of weight during the winter and then lose it during the summer.
And presumably that varies on where you are geographically. There's very little seasonal variation here, for example, compared with the UK, and especially compared with the Midwest or somewhere like that. So that would change dramatically. You'd have to take that into account. Just tell us a little bit about your book. I don't think we've discussed that yet. Hormetics.
Buy the book, people. It's on Amazon. I call it Hormetics, Physical Fitness for Free People, which was a last-minute change of the subtitle, where the previous subtitle was something like Unlocking Your Dormant Vitality. And this concept of we have beneath our genetics, or above it, I guess, depending on your perspective, there's this whole set of epigenetic switches, basically, that parts of our genetic code that will only be activated in response to environmental stimuli, that we can turn on or off. And I talk about my own journey from illness to health. In college, I came down with a mysterious illness after traveling to an exotic, faraway place that may or may not have had a swine flu outbreak the year before. I have no idea what it actually was, but it put me out for about a month, where I was really out of commission, lying in bed. And in that period of time, I think what happened is my body basically gave up. Nothing was being demanded of it. And so a lot of these switches just kind of shut off and said, kept me in that state, until my doctor said, sometimes I see patients. He didn't have any concrete diagnosis, but he had seen enough people like me who, in his view, had just sort of lost the will to live. And that way of framing it really struck a chord, where I could see how in the long-term period of illness I'd become kind of demoralized. So there's a psychological component to it. And starting with the little bit of willpower and motivation that I had, I started to bootstrap a little bit of strength here and there. I would, sprint down the street because I couldn't go for long runs anymore, or I would hammer out 10, 15 push-ups before collapsing into exhaustion. And I found that within a certain range, that stress would make me stronger. If I went past that, it might lead to a setback. And this concept of hormesis from pharmacology, where a small amount of a toxic substance functions as a medicine, where it might kill you at a bigger dose, turns out to be, you can find it in just about any area. So you find it with respect to the elements, the heat and the cold. With COVID, you find it with respect to the open air factor, or the Spanish flu. They discovered that patients who were put in the overflow beds in World War I outdoors recovered much faster than the patients who were in the indoor, poorly ventilated tents. So nature, I think, is a double-edged sword in that it can be harsh and extreme, but we're also adapted to live within a certain range of stress. And when modern life takes that away from us, the result is that we get sick, lethargic, and in the end, some of us end up losing the will to live.
Yes, at the end of this period, you converted as well, didn't you?
Does that is part of the story.
Yeah, do you describe that in the book, or is it an additional aspect? I know it's not the main focus at all.
Yeah, I do talk about it a little bit. There's a couple of sections where it peaks out, and probably the first chapter on fasting is where it might be the most obvious that I'm writing from the perspective of a Christian who thinks that there's more than just that idea that I described at the beginning of some accidental or some sort of evolved benefits of tradition behind the religious wisdom. And then I also talk about just a little bit of the kind of existential crisis of modern life. There's a chapter about the 50-mile march, which we turned into the 50-mile march for eternal life just before Pentecost. And this idea of sort of, there's one moment where I talk about reaching the Golden Gate Bridge after walking across, I'd made it about 40 miles around the San Francisco Bay, trying to walk across all three bridges for the first time. I don't think anyone had ever done it before. And I get to the Golden Gate Bridge, and the gate is shut because it's a sort of anti-suicide measure. And I think that that speaks on multiple levels to the kind of crisis of our time, where one, there's this kind of extreme risk aversion where everything is assessed in terms of probabilities and hyper awareness of risk, and that can kind of ruin it for everyone else.
Yes.
But there's also, the very real tragedy of the people who don't find reasons to live. And I think part of that is that we become so disembodied, disconnected from nature and from our own nature. Yeah. So that was, I think, a part of my conversion, although that might be a longer story for another podcast, how it all ties together.
Yes, well, maybe we will discuss that. But I think that what you're beginning to do here from a Christian perspective is interesting, and I don't know how much has really been done. So just this idea of combining the physical and the dietary and the spiritual, and having all of this ordered to the highest need, which is spiritual. But so acknowledging the benefits of modern science in understanding the body and nutrition, with a little bit of skepticism. I'm aware that all of these things there are all sorts of conflicting interests from the people who are pushing information on you. But to see how this might be combined with the optimal spiritual practices in a Christian way, I'm not aware of a lot of this being done, and it seems to me we're on a little bit of the beginning of the journey of discovery rather than at the end here. That I think it's something that's exciting and will develop in the future. I don't know how you feel about that, but
yeah, absolutely, and I think that the power of some grounding in science, but also not getting too far from the ultimate mystery of our sort of, the miracle of human beings who are created in God's image, and what that means to be, enfleshed, and to be a body rather than to have a body that we treat like something. And here's your instruction manual. It doesn't work that way, and we can follow principles, and we can develop toolkits for understanding better, but there's always this sense, and I do talk a little bit actually in the section about vision. For the past 2 weeks I haven't been wearing glasses because one pair fell in the water while I was sailing, and the other pair that I normally wear for close-up use isn't as necessary, because I've been doing these active focusing exercises where now I can actually see my computer screen from a distance of about 12 to 14 inches. So I don't need it. But I make an analogy between the hypertrophy of muscles when we overuse them or stress them to the point where they need to get bigger and they adapt, to one modern adaptation, or you could say maladaptation, of reading close up. And I think Marshall McLuhan talked about this, the hypertrophied eye, that post-literate societies are kind of all about the medium has become, we've actually moved from the dominant medium being text, and now it's electronic media, and we're constantly bombarded with screens and these images that are deteriorating our eyesight because we're always looking at a screen 6 inches away from our face. And so I lost my eyesight that way, and now I'm kind of working to get it back, and along with it to reclaim a little bit of the mystical perception of the world that came along with a pre-literate society before the written word, where things were more spoken or read aloud. That actually is a different way of kind of interpreting the world, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of the medieval Catholic way of seeing the world, as opposed to the post-Reformation Protestant way that's really rooted in the written word.
Right, but what I like about your approach is that you don't over-romanticize the past either. It's always worth looking to learn, but we have to acknowledge where we are today, and as I say, with a healthy skepticism, look at what's the new information that's available to us. But always, I think, with our ultimate end in mind, which is union with God in heaven, and working back from that or down from that. And then I have a feeling that all of these things will start to make sense. One thing that occurred to me as you were speaking is this emphasis on people have different needs and different requirements. So I was speaking about how I approach the Eastern fast. Different people do it differently, depending on where they are spiritually, how long they've been doing it, what their physical requirements are. And once you take that into account, then all of these things are interconnected. You can't compartmentalize who you are. As you say, we are a body and a soul. And so this unification is something that's very important, I think. I'll let you finish off, and then we'll finish there, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, and it's an important addition that we are, we're body and soul. I didn't mention that, and there is a risk, I think, of trying to reduce the soul to something scientific, and I see this all over the place in kind of would-be mystics or people that maybe haven't connected deeply to any particular religious tradition. They're still trying to remain squarely in the secular world, but they want the benefits of mysticism. They want to find some way to package it up and sell it as a self, some sort of product or experience. And I think that the real mystical experiences are never actually like that. Often they come through hardship and difficulty, and even if we can characterize one aspect of them through a scientific lens, it's never going to really get at the essence of it. And so anyway, I think that if people are curious about, an approach to fitness that has a grounding in some of the science, but that also leaves open a lot of room for individual experience and trial and error, where you can figure out for yourself, what works with your body and with your lifestyle. I don't really like that word lifestyle, but I do think that, when you're looking at certain kinds of exercise that you can just stack into your day, just add them in naturally, and they help you get other things done. We need to find ways to move more purposefully. So there's a whole section about posture and kind of purposeful movement, and how we can just stand with more confidence. That's being, one of the most basic actions is just our posture. And from there, learning, what kinds of outdoor elements, how those can play into an overall better, healthier version of yourself. So the book is called Hormetics, Physical Fitness for Free People. And I'm giving away the first couple chapters for free on my website, which is unnaturalmethod.com. And then there's also a little bonus section. Not sure how the Way of Beauty editors will feel about the hormetic vices, but I talk about caffeine, tobacco, salt, and alcohol. Without endorsing any of them, just taking a look at what the hormetic ranges of these might be in some situations.
So you're pretty pro those things, are you?
Well, not so much on the tobacco. Salt, definitely. Caffeine, I have a tortured relationship with, but I've consumed coffee in the last 24 hours, and then alcohol. They're double-edged swords.
Yeah.
Except salt.
Okay.
More salt.
Really? Okay, good. Because I have plenty of salt and plenty of coffee. I don't.
It's pretty hard to get into the toxic range of salt consumption.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because it's had a bad press, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of studies. The biggest analysis of salt and salt intake across the world found that the societies with the highest salt intake had the lowest hypertension.
That's interesting. Okay, well, there's a thought for us to leave us with. Charlie Deist, great to talk to you again.
Likewise, David.
You've been listening to the Way of Beauty podcast, conversations on Catholic faith and culture. If you enjoyed this episode, then please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. This will help others to find it too. Also, if you're interested in delving more deeply into the material that we discuss, you can do a course at the Pontifex University website. That's pontifex.university.